Okay. Okay, good evening, everybody. We are going to get started in about 5 minutes. We're going to let people come in a little bit late. We usually have some folks that come in late, so we'll be getting started promptly at 6:35. Food in the back, restrooms over to the left. Thank you. 5:35. Thank you. I guess we're done. I guess we're done, right? Let's go home. Are you here all week? Okay, good. Good. Are you liking it? You liking it?
The whole SSD thing really got me.
But you
My
got
team is
through
different.
it.
My team is different right now.
Oh,
I've got
really?
some gaps.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm really trying to fill those gaps with, like, because before when I had
But you're good
Daniela,
at that.
yeah, before when I had Daniela,
She was really strong.
like the A team, we always had the A team, and now it's like, now I've come back in and there's a lot of new faces. And I'm like, okay, so who's A team, B team, C team, and I'm trying to figure all that out. And there's actually there's a small gap in the SVU team, which concerns me. So,
They're very young.
well, Lily's very young. You've met her, and she's very talented. She's the liaison. Technically, she's excellent, but like as far as when somebody's in her grill about all of this,
Did she shut down?
I don't know. We'll see. We will role play with her.
Oh, that's a role play.
I told Jessica that we're going to do. I called it sensitivity training, for
Yeah,
lack of a
that's
better
a good term.
Okay,
No,
fine.
I think it's a good
All
term.
right.
Good, good term. It's not nearly as scary, right?
Yeah. But I told her that's going to happen.
Good evening. For those of you just joining us, we're going to get started at 5:35. We're going to give people a couple more minutes to come in, get settled. Thank you. Okay, well, I lost the bet. I lost the bet. I said 5 people.
So if she starts coming on about when we can,
I'm going to shut it.
just say that's already been approved.
Hang on 1 second. Hang on. And I want Jessica to. Good evening. Can you hear me? You can. Okay, hi, my name is Tracy Craig. I'll be moderating tonight's meeting. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is Ford's 11th community meeting, which is kind of a milestone. We've been here 11 times updating you on environmental issues in the area. This is just a general update meeting. So a few things. Oh, I'm going to do my own slides, so hang on. Here. John, how do I move this? Where's it? Oh yeah, I'm that age. Okay, so there's our agenda. Again, I'm Tracy Craig, and then with me tonight is Jessica Law, project manager with the Water Board. She's been overseeing this project for the entirety of the time that we've been out here. And then we have Mike Barnes, who's the program manager with WSP. That's the environmental consultant for Ford Motor Company. And then over here, I think most of you know Ken Connor. He's a senior vice president, I believe, with WSP, also a professional engineer. And he might answer some questions if we get deep into technical discussions. Other than that, we were going to have Amanda Palumbo here. I think most of you know her. Amanda is with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, which usually she's here to answer health-related questions. Amanda has a family commitment and she couldn't be here tonight. So any kind of health questions that we get, we'll be writing those down and getting the answers to you at a later date, probably within a week or so when she returns from her family situation. Okay, so this is our agenda, pretty straightforward. We have the opening, then Jessica will give you a project update, and then we'll save time for questions and answers. I would like to ask if you have clarifying questions, please ask them during the presentation. But if you have general questions, please hold them till the end so everybody can hear them. Also, if you have questions specific to your property, we will stay after. We have boards over here that we can facilitate a deeper discussion about people's individual situations. One last thing before I get through one more slide. We are recording this and it will be live streamed on, I think it's being live streamed right now on YouTube. And then we will also put the recording up on Ford's website for people that didn't make the meeting or want to watch it. So to that end, if you have a question, I'm probably going to repeat it so that the people that are watching it can hear it. So it's a little bit cumbersome, but I'd ask you to make sure that you either articulate your question very loud, and if we don't, I'll repeat it so it goes a little bit slower. And finally, if you don't want to be recorded, if you don't want your face recorded, just face this way and the camera won't catch you. Okay. All right, so told you what the purpose of the meeting is to provide an overview, and then when you came in, I'm hoping that you signed in, and there's a packet of information that you should have gotten. The agenda, a glossary of terms, the fact sheet that we mailed out, and then just some other ancillary information that are handouts. So if you don't have that, raise your hand and Sarah will bring you one. Okay, looks like everybody got it. So you got the handouts, I've done the introductions. Food in the back, restrooms over here to the left, and with that, I am going to hand this over. I'm doing your slide for you. Look at that. Thanks. And then first, Jessica.
All right, so good evening. I always say for those in the back, I have a tendency to move when I talk. So if I get away from the microphone too much, I've always said you can just do a thumbs up, and I know that means talk closer to the microphone. Here we go. There we go. Better? Perfect. Okay. So tonight's presentation, it's going to talk the first two parts. We're going to have the project recap and the vapor intrusion overview. These are just high-level summary refreshers. I've gone over them before, so I'm going to be brief. But if I'm too brief, stop me. Let me know if I'm not explaining something well enough in my brief description. Then we're going to talk about what's new for the first half of the year. So what's happened since the last time we met. That time frame is going to cover January 1st to June 30th. Then we'll talk about the remediation progress update, and then next steps, as well as project schedules. And then we'll end with the question and answer session. So first, I just like to go over and do that kind of general overview of how we got here. Let me pull up a pointer. Okay. So, first, I just like to go over and do that kind of general overview of how we got here. The, let me pull up a pointer. Okay. So, first, I just like to go over and do that kind of general overview of how we got here. The, let me pull up a pointer. Okay. So, first, I just like to go over and do that kind of general overview of how we got here. So there's the green outline on this slide. This is the original 200 acres that Ford had leased. It's bounded to the north by Bison, to the east by MacArthur, the south is Ford Road, and then the west is Jamboree. Now, Ford operated on 98 acres within that from 1957 until 1993. That's outlined in blue in the center of that green outline. Now, when they operated there, they did aerospace and electronic research and development, as well as some limited manufacturing. The facility closed down in 1993, and that's when demolition and remediation activities began. And in 1996, just based on information that was provided by Ford, it was determined that cleanup of the main area was complete, and the regulatory agency at the time granted soil closure. That soil closure is what allowed the property to be rezoned from industrial use to residential use. And redevelopment began in 1998. There was still the requirement for continued off-site groundwater assessment and remediation, and that's when the case was transferred to the Santa Ana Water Board for regulatory oversight. Now, it's been an open case with us since that time, and all the work has been conducted by Ford under a voluntary agreement. So in addition to the off-site groundwater assessment and monitoring and remediation, in 2006, 2008, and 2012, there were those limited soil gas assessments that were conducted in select areas. Conclusions from those assessments was that health risks from vapor intrusion were not present. These conclusions were made without any indoor air samples being collected, and it was based on industry knowledge of vapor intrusion at that time. These conclusions were made prior to the 2014 US EPA memo regarding short-term exposure risks to the chemical called trichloroethene, or TCE. And it was also prior to the 2016 updated environmental screening levels that were established by the San Francisco Bay Water Board. We utilized that when screening our sites. And so in 2017, a conceptual site model was prepared and submitted for this site, and this is a report. It looks at the site history, all of the data that's been collected, and it compares it to the current screening levels and industry standards. And that is what's used to identify if there's any data gaps that may need additional investigation. One of the data gaps that was identified in this CSM was the need to reevaluate the site for vapor intrusion. And that was based on the groundwater concentrations and those previously mentioned soil gas assessments. So then in 2018, that's when the vapor intrusion assessment began. So now I just want to kind of jump into vapor intrusion, which is the migration of chemicals in the vapor phase below the ground into a building. Now I have extra definitions up here. I've gone over them before. They're here for your reference. But in order for there to be the potential for vapor intrusion, you must first have soil gas that's contaminated with the vapor-forming chemicals such as volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. Now for this particular site, the primary contaminants of concern are trichloroethene, that TCE, and tetrachloroethene, or PCE. And these two particular contaminants are volatile organic compounds. Now, soil gas, it's also referred to as soil vapor. I'm going to use those terms a little interchangeably tonight, but I'm talking about the same thing. That's the gas that's found in the soil's air spaces. In the past, I've used the image of a sponge because a sponge has all those nice little tiny air pockets. So does soil. And this inlay that's up on the left shows that and how the vapors can reside between those soil particles. Now, soil gas, that originates from a source of the vapor-forming chemicals that's either in soil or groundwater. So this can be soil contamination or dissolved contamination in groundwater, either of which can be off-gassing. And as that soil gas moves below the ground, it can enter buildings through cracks in the foundation or utilities that enter the building. Now, normal ventilation, that can flush these chemicals out of a building so it doesn't cause a problem. But if there's not enough ventilation to flush it out and it just collects, it can collect at concentrations that can pose a risk to human health. So there can also be other sources of chemicals in indoor air and outdoor air. So if you have bad air pollution outside, that can come into indoor air. And if there's chemicals used inside a building, like cleaning products, air fresheners, scented candles, some of them, hobby glue, gun cleaner, the list kind of goes on. There's a number of things that can introduce chemicals into indoor air as well. And so another thing I talked about at the last meeting was just the vapor behavior. It is inherently complex and dynamic. And the closer we get to a building's foundation and the ground surface, the more variability is observed. And these variations can be influenced due to natural and man-made factors. So some of those natural factors would be the temperature, atmospheric pressure, wind, precipitation, climate, soil type, soil moisture. And then some of those man-made factors would be your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning or HVAC operations, which can cause pressure differences between the building and below the ground. And heating can also cause what's called a stack effect, where as that hot air rises in the building, it can draw vapors from below the foundation into a building. And then last, you have the building condition. So the age of the building, the foundation type, the integrity of the foundation, the size, ceiling height, all of this can either hinder or enhance vapor migration. And that's why one round of indoor air sampling is not enough, and why we do have that long-term indoor air monitoring program, and why it's necessary. So now that we got through the basics, now we can talk about what's new. So I'm gonna start with assessment and monitoring. Again, this is for the time frame between January 1st and June 30th.
Yeah, just before we get there. Going back to your slide on all the time frames, going back to 93. You measured certain gases and certain chemicals were measured in that time frame. Test 1, 2. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think so. Can hear me without this. So it was measured against certain criteria in that time frame. Did that criteria change from when it was initially done to the present day, which caused the modifications and change?
Yeah, and then another one was another kind of just industry standard and general understanding of vapor behavior is that as it moves up through the soil column, goes from deeper to shallower, they also understood, now we've learned more about what's called capping effect. So a foundation can basically cause a cap and not allow that ambient air from like a landscaped area to help dilute those concentrations and reduce those concentrations further. And so it's some of those things that have been learned also about vapor behavior that has warranted a need to look further at it. And yeah, it is a change in just the toxicity levels of something like a TCE. All right, so any other ones before we're good? Okay. So we'll start with vapor intrusion assessment. So there were 9 soil gas probes installed. 305 locations were sampled. There were 13 homes sampled as well. Now, no new homes were offered air purifiers. This is the same as the last update, so this is good news. And no new homes were added to the indoor air investigation area. Now, because we continue the monitoring, if this changes, homes will be added as appropriate, again, wanting to have a protective approach of human health. Next is data gap assessment, and this is primarily consisted of some additional groundwater sampling in the area. This year, for the first half, there was 3 groundwater samples that were collected from one location. They were just quick grab samples. No wells were put in at this time. but they collected discrete samples at multiple depths below the ground. And then we have the long-term indoor air monitoring. So 23 properties had letters mailed out to them. Those letters included the frequency of the sampling, which ranges from every 6 months to once every 5 years. And the frequency is based on the future risk, that soil gas data that was presented in the human health risk assessments. And just kind of want to also mention that indoor air monitoring is important because it provides that analytical data to support that conditions are not changing. I've gone over the just different complexities of vapor behavior. So we want to continue monitoring to make sure that if there's any changes, we can respond accordingly to minimize that risk to you. And so again, if you've received a letter to participate in that long-term indoor air monitoring, we encourage you to sign it and participate.
Jessica?
Yeah.
Of the 23 letters, is that both Bay Ridge and Belcourt Terrace?
That actually, so the question was of the 23 letters, if it was 2 communities, Bay Ridge Park and Belcourt Terrace. It's actually throughout the investigation area. So that would include 8 different communities. And I know at a later time, Mike can actually get you that information.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so then we've got the risk evaluation. So back in 2020, 2021, there were the human health risk assessment reports that were prepared. And since that time, more data has been collected. So we want to make sure our path forward for the project is still protective of human health. So addendums are being prepared and submitted. So in the first half of the year, we received 5 of them. We have responded to 5. A couple of those were submitted from the last meeting, and they're going to continue to get submitted. Now, the addendums in general are consistent with the original submittals, with the exception of one community where we got some additional data, both soil gas and indoor air. The indoor air data is all still remains protective of human health. The future data, the future risk calculations, that soil gas data was higher. And so now we're evaluating potential response actions. And I'm going to pull up this little chart. I've shown it in past presentations. I don't expect you to be able to read it. But I want to use it as that reminder of how we use the site data and the risk calculations to determine those next steps. So we have that first section, and that is looking at risk calculations for future risk, that soil gas data, and current risk, the indoor air. And it groups it into 3 kind of priority categories. We have that green, which is the low, the yellow would be your medium risk, and then the red is the higher risk. And based on where the risk falls is what determines our potential response actions. So for this particular community, while the current risk is still in that green, the future risk went from yellow to red. So we asked Ford to submit a new feasibility study to evaluate those potential response actions. And this could be remediation, it could be mitigation or monitoring, or a combination of those. But this is why we're not just stopping at those original risk assessments. We are continuing to evaluate the data that's being collected. Next, we have remediation and mitigation. And so what's happened again? We're talking January 1st. This one I put through current. Remediation, as a reminder, that's the cleanup activity of removing the underlying source. But remediation is only feasible when concentrations are high enough. Mitigation, that is an engineered exposure control. So you can either address vapors before they enter a building or treat those vapors after they've entered a building and have accumulated. An example of that would be for the homes that have vapor intrusion identified. They've been offered those air purifiers. But now we're moving forward with some longer term mitigation, and they're starting with subslab depressurization systems within Bay Ridge Park. We refer to that community as Parcel 10. And then other communities and properties will be offered subslab depressurization systems if vapor intrusion is identified. Then we have the monitored natural attenuation. This would be your, this is for areas that the soil gas plume or the groundwater plume does not warrant active remediation, such as soil vapor extraction. And this is a remediation type that relies on the naturally occurring reduction of the contamination. It is preferred and approved for those areas where there is the lower impacts to groundwater and soil gas. But when we take the monitored natural attenuation approach, it has to be demonstrated through monitoring. So one of the communities, this would be 1 Ford Road, they just had 8 groundwater monitoring wells installed and 9 additional soil gas probes throughout the community to help with that monitoring efforts. And again, if the data that's getting collected over time does not show that it is naturally decreasing, we're going to reevaluate those strategies for the project. And then lastly, we have the soil vapor extraction system. So what's been going on is the same as last time. The City of Newport Beach permitting, the South Coast Air Quality Management District permitting, as well as the Southern California Edison power location identification and access negotiations. These are all very complex tasks, and so everyone is working together with communities and the permitting agencies to keep things moving forward. And so for the active remediation, this is in the 2 communities directly north of the former facility. This is Bay Ridge Park and Belcourt Terrace. And they will have soil vapor extraction systems installed soon. We're working through that remediation process. And I know the slide looks the same as the last time. There's the public notice process for 2 of those permits, the City of Newport Beach and the Air Quality Management District. The public notice process and public hearings for the city permit have wrapped up, and so I know the city is working with Ford and WSP to finalize that permit, and the public notice process for the Air Quality Management District, which is the permit for the soil vapor extraction systems, that is going right now. So when it comes to what's next for that remediation implementation, we've got the public notice period for the AQMD permit. This is going from August of this year, so this month, and it's gonna extend for those 30 days into next month. Then we have parcel 10, that's Bay Ridge Park, and parcel 11, this is Belcourt Terrace. Those construction schedules, we're looking for a start of October, November, that goes through February, March into next year. And then we're anticipating startup of these soil vapor extraction systems in March for Bay Ridge Park and in April for Belcourt Terrace. Now, there's still items that can cause delays. The construction activities are going to be starting in the fall and going through the winter, so weather may cause delays. Getting receipt of those final permits for both the city and the Air Quality Management District, and then the Southern California Edison power drop construction. But this slide for the additional what's next. Those permitting complexities have extended those remedial design timeframes, so that approximate 6 months has been extended, but once those systems are installed, they're gonna be operating for about 1 year. Once they are done operating, there's gonna be post-remediation monitoring to confirm their effectiveness. That'll happen for about 2+ years. Ford and WSP are working closely with the communities and permitting agencies for that continued forward progress. And then for the areas where it has the monitored natural attenuation, you're gonna see groundwater wells getting installed, some additional soil vapor probes installed, and then Bay Ridge Park, they did install the soil vapor probes, and in Belcourt Terrace, that will be happening later on this year is the hope, or early next year. And so then for monitoring, I've said it before and I'm going to keep saying it, this is going to be ongoing until the end of the year, until case closure. You've got groundwater and soil gas monitoring. That's to evaluate the plume stability. We want to know that the plume is not moving. and that it is decreasing and not expanding. That gets monitored 2 times a year. Then we have that long-term indoor air monitoring going on. This ranges from every 6 months to once every 5 years. And that data being collected, the soil gas data and the indoor air data, is getting updated in those risk assessment reports. These are being updated to confirm that the current risk estimates are still protective, and if the risk changes, that our path forward changes as well. All of the risk assessment addendums are being reviewed by Amanda with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. She's the toxicologist, that is her area of expertise. So we keep sending them to her for her review. So just to summarize, it's continuing the monitoring activities, continuing efforts to gain access and test indoor air. I know it's been 5 years of requesting access, but some folks have chosen not to participate. We're still working on encouraging people to participate. It's not too late until the case closes. We want to begin those remediation activities in the select areas following that remediation process, and then continue the community-specific meetings and communication. This is going to be ongoing and as needed, such as work notices before they start, any kind of pre-construction meetings, things like that. So for more information, we've got GeoTracker. That is the State Water Board's database where all of the reports and data gets uploaded. A copy of this presentation, along with the link to the recording embedded in that presentation, is available on GeoTracker. We have GovDelivery, that is formerly known as Lyris List. That's our email notifications. This is what I'll send out to let folks who are subscribed to that of when the next public meeting is, when we have our new updated community fact sheets. There's also the Water Board webpage, and then Ford has developed their site-specific website and 800 number, and then there's the local information repository at the library. So now we can go to questions.
Can I ask a question on your what's next slide?
You can.
I just wanted clarification on the groundwater monitoring wells, soil acreage, all the various wells.
Yes.
There's more wells in Bay Ridge that will be.
I think, part of yours should have already been installed. Those were installed back in, wasn't it 2021? And that was back when it was first, the feasibility study and remedial action plan was first approved, and there was that remedial design and implementation plan.
Yeah, right now we don't have any plans to install additional wells within Bay Ridge Park. I'm not saying that couldn't change, but right now the SVE extraction wells, the soil gas probes have been installed, so we don't have any plans. Yeah, there's a lot of them. Yeah, we've got it covered.
Okay, time for questions and answers. I'm going to just remind everybody, Sarah's going to be coming up to you with the microphone because we are recording this and we want to make sure that people that are watching it understand or hear all the questions. And I'd like to ask a question first. I'm just curious, this is the first meeting you've ever been at? Okay, all right, so we have some new people, so I'm glad that we did go through a lot of the primer information. And we do have a fact sheet there. I just wanted to say when you came in, there's a fact sheet in there, so if you'd like to refer to the website for background information, Ford's website is listed in that fact sheet along with the 800 number that you can call to get a hold of Mike, and Jessica's number is also listed in there just for future reference. So I'd like to call people off just 1, 2, 3 so that we know who's going to ask questions. So if you'd raise your hand, I'm just going to number you off. And I think you were first. But let me get everybody else too so we know. So can you raise your hand if you'd like to comment? So 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's stop there and look up.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica. Very informative. I appreciate that. I'm at Belcourt Terrace, P11, and P10. Between P10 and P11 is One Ford Place. Or no, One Ford, whatever it's called. The houses, but why is there nothing there?
So I'll add my own. Sorry about that. Okay, so back in from 93 to 96, when the facility was demoed and stuff, they did extensive cleanup back then. And from the data that's being collected right now, the cleanup was successful. There's still some residual, but it's not at concentrations high enough that warrant that active remediation.
Jessica, I just need a little clarification on your first slide when you mentioned that that area was rezoned and approved for residential development in 96 and 98. I know Bay Ridge opened in 1985 as an original owner, and I know regular Belcourt opened about the same time in stages. I'm not sure about Belcourt Terrace, but that preceded those years you gave us by quite a few.
So that time frame was just for the 98 acres, that blue outlined area that Ford had operated. They had leased the other place, the other surrounding area, but they were not actively conducting work on there. So as my understanding is that section of the lease at times were let go, but that was part of the original lease.
Okay, 3?
I was curious in the homes that were identified as being offered air purifiers, if they noticed odor or something in their homes.
No, these chemicals of concern would not emit an odor.
Sorry, Mike?
These chemicals of concern do not emit an odor. Yeah.
And if they do, they're at significantly high, like the pure product
Yeah.
has an odor, but at the vapor intrusion levels, these low levels that we're seeing, they are odorless.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions on the SSD systems. Maybe you could just clarify or explain. The one that seems to be complete at number 19 but hasn't been turned on yet, why is that? And when do you expect to turn it on?
That system is on and operational
As of?
as of today.
Okay.
And it has been tested as far as the influence beneath the house, and it's shown to be effective.
Good to know.
And Mike, I'm just going to ask you explain the acronym SSD because we have
Oh,
new people here.
subslab depressurization system.
And then also on the SSD systems, the one that's under construction, I'll just call it right now, at 39, could you explain why there's that trenching there? I live right there, so
Sure, of course.
it's a lot of exposure, and I'm just curious, is it a one-off or is that many?
Well, a lot of these are going to be one-offs because if you live in Bay Ridge Park, you can appreciate the Tetris-like construction of the units with the garages and different units being kind of overlaid on each other in a Tetris-like format. That particular location, for one of the properties, we were going to install it along the chimney, and that chimney directly blocked the view. I mean, it was right in front of another property's deck. And so what we did is we trenched that line and are putting two systems back into the corner of two homes, which will then have two separate systems running to two separate homes and then be concealed by a privacy fence.
Like one fence to cover both
Yeah,
of that?
and that trenching that you saw today, like all of that will be covered up, back up. You won't see that, but it'll basically, we're combining two units in one
Right.
location in the back.
So the concern to me, just not knowing how it all works, is the exposure. So those vapors are trenched all the way along.
Oh, good question. I see what you're saying as far as exposure. So the point of extraction, which is beneath the home, that's a perforated pipe, and that's where the vacuum pulls those vapors from below the foundation. The PVC that is below the ground, that is all a closed system. So that PVC is 2-inch Schedule 40 PVC that runs below ground. So are you concerned about the potential of it being damaged during, let's say, construction or excavation or something like that? If that were to happen, the system would be shut down through inspections. But all the contractors that work in that area are required to call USA Dig alert before they dig. All of the landscape contractors that come on site, they're aware of the project, and we're working closely with them.
Thank you.
And I'll add with these subslab depressurization systems, there's going to be routine monitoring of them. So if they go down, this will be identified, and it can be problem solved to address it. But even if the system shuts down, vapors won't just release directly into the neighborhood.
Where
Correct.
will they go?
They're gonna actually just kind of go back to how it was prior to the SSD system, because there's no vacuum to pull it out, so it's just gonna kind of hang out below ground like it is right now.
Got it.
And each one of these SSD systems has a carbon treatment unit within it. So all of that air is being treated. So regardless if it did shut down and there was some sort of passive effect, that air would be treated as well.
So is the carbon treatment that large cylindrical
It is.
addition to what you initially presented to us?
Correct.
And why was that added and not presented to us?
Sure. So this was an oversight in communication as far as what we had presented, as far as some of the renderings and some of the drawings that we had shown in previous community meetings. The disconnect and WSP takes full responsibility for this, is the point at which we ran the pilot test, which was the test to determine how we would need to design the system, to the point what we were showing the community as a whole. There was a disconnect in that communication. Our design was larger, and our design is based on the testing that we did to determine the engineering behind what we would need as far as the size of the carbon unit, the size of the blower, the piping, all of that was determined based off of our pilot study. Again, the miscommunication that we're fully responsible for was not showing an updated rendering to the entire community as a whole, but we did conduct site walks with each of the properties that are eligible or that have taken us up on the offer of a SSD system and showed them the system as a drawing. So we are aware that that was something that caught people off guard. We're taking measures to conceal those units. I'm not sure if you saw, but we put a privacy gate up around one of them. We'll continue to work on downsizing the system. I can't make any promises as it relates to downsizing the system that's there, because you just have to have a certain size of equipment to pull that air to create that vacuum.
Okay,
So,
but just as a follow-up, just for your information.
Sure.
I am one of those houses that's been identified and a team has come out and nothing was presented to me.
as far as the
Correct.
data sheet, okay, so we can walk through that again, and I'll review
Well,
that with my
I
team.
see it now, so I
Yeah.
understand, but it's been 5 or 6 weeks. And so I guess really the point is better communication from all of you, and timely communication would be helpful for all of us.
I completely agree. Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate the comment, and we are taking, in addition to trying to work on what the SSD system will look like, we are enhancing our communication outreach. We used to send monthly emails. We are now going to send weekly emails and try to provide a little bit more information as far as the status of these systems, like your question, whether or not, why is that system not on?
Right.
This week's email that will go out Friday or Monday morning will tell you that that system is running. We can't say the system at this address is running for privacy reasons. I think everybody that lives within Bay Ridge Park knows where it is. But for that reason, we will just say
It's hard to miss.
of the 4 systems that were installed, 3 of them are operational. If it's not running, we'll provide a quick explanation, but not too much detail. But we will be notifying people of systems being installed and when they're actually operational.
Got it. So I have one last thing. If you guys wouldn't mind addressing the letter that we received from South Coast Air Quality Management about your permits. There are a couple of comments here that are different or concerning. They state that these type of systems are typically in place or can be in place for 5 years.
Yep, I can respond to that.
And then secondly, so you can do them both at the same
Sure.
time, there's also a statement about the equipment will result in the emission of small quantities of toxic compounds. You want to address that as well?
I do, yeah.
Thank you.
So the first, as far as, and I forget the exact language they used as far as the 5 years, but I think they said typical systems typical to this can operate for up to 5 years. That is not what we anticipate with our system based on the calculations, but we actually asked AQMD to change that to the 2-year timeframe that we've been disseminating to the public, and they did not want to change that. So we have no control in what they provide, but that is not our intention, that this system will run 5 years. I think we've been pretty clear that we will run the system for a year. We will assess it throughout that first year and then make additional decisions whether or not that system needs to be pulsed for a subsequent year and then go from there. But it's our estimation that the system will be there for about 2 years. And then your second question was related to toxic substances. Yes, so.
The toxic compounds?
Yeah, so the air that comes out is not required to be 100% clean. Clean, I want to use that term loosely. but it will meet the regulatory standards that are outlined in the permit as far as discharge, which are developed through their review of our inspection permit and our system design, and are protective of human health. So I think they said 2.6 pounds of VOCs could be admitted from the discharge point. I think that's what it said. Per day. But yeah, that, as far as discharge compounds, Ken, do you want to add anything related to that?
So I do not believe through our calculation.
I'm going to have you do this because of the recording.
Thank you. I do not believe. I do not. Hello? Okay. I do not believe that we're going to be discharging 2.5 pounds or whatever the number was that was there. What I think that they were trying to get at was that if there weren't a carbon system on it, that you could have seen something like that happen. But the carbon system should be capturing a huge amount, like 99.9999% of whatever is going through. I also want to point out that during our pilot test that we did in the same area, we ran it for a certain number of days, and we only got like
It was 0.26 pounds after they
0.26
did.
pounds.
Yeah.
So we're not expecting this to be the type of SVE system that you would have at a gasoline site or some other site in which the soil is absolutely saturated with whatever the chemical is. And I think part of the letter that they were trying to get the information across to you was what was typical or what could happen if there weren't these safeguards that were put in place. So, of course we are. Yes, we've said all along that we're going to have the monitoring that is both a laboratory sample and also the PID, which is the state of the art for what we're trying to do here.
And you'll publish that information?
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely.
These reports, as the regulatory agency, we require, once the system is started, we will have a system startup report, and it's going to have all of that initial analytical data that they collect, those PID readings, the lab reports, and then after that, they will be submitting quarterly reports.
So one other thing that I want to be clear about, we're talking about some sort of system that in those first 2 or 3 weeks, that will be the most of the material that we will have ever gotten out with respect to it. Almost every one of the SVE systems that I've ever been involved with, this is going back 38 years now, all of them have this time period in that first month, that first 2 or 3 weeks, depending on how much chemical is actually there in the ground, that you're taking out the maximum amount. And then it kind of decreases down to what we would call an asymptotic limit. And that what we probably will see in this first year is that we'll run it at the full capacity for a month or 2, 3 months, whatever. We'll start looking at what the data is telling us and then figure out a course, a path from there. What I want to say up front is there is enough material in the ground in order to warrant us doing this, but it isn't as if this is in like the top 10 of chemical concentrations that we've ever seen at a site like this, okay? We're doing this mainly out of an abundance of caution and also because we are seeing vapor intrusion in a certain number of homes. So this idea that we're gonna flip this switch and it's gonna be a year of 2 pounds a day, going out into the world, that's just not reality. That's not the way any of these SVE systems ever have worked. Is that clear? Do you understand where I'm going? Okay.
Oh,
On that same note, I understand Bayview Terrace, is that right? Bay Ridge Park. Forgive me, this is new for me. I live in One Ford Road, bought there a couple years ago, and called, I think it was you, Jessica, and spoke at length with you about the possibilities of all of this coming to fruition and whatnot. When they did the initial site to remove all of that before it was built in 96 to 98, thank you. Did they find all of those same vapors back then and they just eliminated all of it? Like, how did it magically disappear?
So what had happened back in the mid-90s with the cleanup, they did soil vapor extraction because they had tested soil, groundwater, and then soil vapor. And they did in the areas where you had the high contamination, they did soil vapor extraction, they did some excavation to remove the dirty dirt, and they also did what's called dual phase extraction, and that was removing and treating impacted groundwater and soil vapor and the soil in that area below One Ford Road, and that is what treated it. And this is also the results from back then to now, that we haven't seen this large rebound or any kind of significant soil gas impacts within One Ford Road, is where a lot of our confidence is coming from with the soil vapor extraction operating in Bay Ridge Park and Belcourt Terrace, that this lower time frame, this reduced time frame, will be successful. I think we all have a really high confidence in that. It's just getting it started operating, and we'll confirm it, of course, with the post-remediation monitoring, but that's why there isn't the remediation going on right now.
So second question to that then is, we are considering putting in a pool or a jacuzzi there. Neighbors just finished an addition to a jacuzzi, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh, good Lord, do I really want to open up a can of worms? And if we do that moving forward, do we call you to say, can you come and test?
So part of that soil closure and that rezoning it from industrial use to residential use takes that into consideration. There are certain screening levels for residential properties and even construction workers that this has to meet. And really, when they did all of the redevelopment, there was grading and stuff, and they had a soil management plan back in the 90s when they were doing all of the redevelopment. So any kind of pool digging, unless you uncovered something unsuspected that is not documented, then you would reach out to us. But from what old reports I have skimmed through, none of that would be anticipated or expected.
You don't think we should maybe have someone, when they decide to do the dig, or someone to come back out and at least test it? Or no? Probably not necessary.
No, because, and I'll add, one of the things that we have done as that kind of let's double check that it was done right, with those soil gas probes in the groundwater wells that were recently installed within One Ford Road, we did ask them to do soil testing just to double check, because the way you collect soil samples back in the 90s is a little different than what we ask for now. And so because of that, we were double checking, and all of these wells were strategically placed in areas where you would have that, potentially higher concentrations based on the historical activities that occurred, that old data that they collected, and everything else. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do we have other questions? All right. We got you, so I'll see if there's anybody new that wants to comment. No? Okay. Sarah? Thank you.
Mike, this question is for you. Let's fast forward to March, saying everything has fallen together and the extraction system building is now in place and will start operating behind 94 Hartford. Can you explain the process for the carbon changing and how that works? And have you selected your contractors for that yet?
Yeah, so as far as this...
Mike, you know what? I'm going to ask you just to explain the soil vapor extraction kind of system for people that are new here.
Sure,
And
not a
first,
problem at
as
all.
a primer.
So the soil vapor extraction system that we are talking about is basically in layman's terms, it's a large underground vacuum. There's a series of wells at different depths strategically placed throughout the Bay Ridge community. There's 13 of them. There's 2 wells at different depths in each of those. Those wells are basically the straws that will suck out the contamination. They will be tied into a centralized system, which is the treatment system, the building that will be behind 94 Hartford. Within that building, within 94 Hartford, are all the components that make the system operate. There is a large blower, which is basically the vacuum, creates the vacuum and pulls those vapors into the system. And then there's a series of carbon vessels. Carbon is the media that treats the chemicals of concern. The chemicals of concern adhere to the carbon. And there's 2 vessels. There's what we call a lead vessel and a lag vessel. The lag vessel is a redundancy of safety, so that the lead vessel, if it were to reach its capacity of absorbing these chemicals of concern, there's a secondary system as a lag to make sure that anything that comes through that first vessel is captured and doesn't discharge to the ambient air. So as far as the carbon changeout and a contractor, yes, we have selected a contractor. As far as the schedule for those changeouts, that'll be determined on once the capacity of that carbon is met. Ken may have an idea that he could share as far as how often we would need to do those carbon changeouts, but for now, until we run the system to see how much mass we are pulling out, we won't know when we'll need to change out that carbon. Does that answer your question?
But that will also be in your weekly reports when you're going to do a carbon
And then-
changeout, right?
Yeah, there'll be notification for any sort of carbon changeout.
And then the way they change out the carbon is they will turn off the system, because since everything's under a vacuum, they shut off the system temporarily. They've got, basically it's a vacuum truck that will pull out the spent carbon. They'll put in new carbon and turn the system back on, and then that carbon goes to a recycling facility, so it's properly disposed of, and they get waste manifests so that it's all transported appropriately. They will be wearing the proper PPE for that, yeah. I wouldn't say it's necessarily hazmat suits, it's like just your general personal protective equipment, but that meets the requirements for doing that.
Like an N95, that type thing?
They might have a half face or full face respirator, just again, out of abundance of caution. But what I want to be clear, and I think where the question is going, is none of the carbon sees the light of day. It's sucked out. It goes through a hose, goes out to a vac truck that is parked nearby because there's a road nearby. It's not like any of it is spilled on the ground or shoveled out or anything like that. It's all handled in that way. And as far as the change outs, there's kind of a compromise in the design. If we wanted to make sure that we never had to change out the carbon the whole time, the building probably would have been twice the size as what we ended up with. So there's some calculation that we've made where we think based on the mass, and again, most of that mass will be extracted out in that first month, 2 months. There might be a change out after that, but I doubt seriously whether there'll be another change out for the rest of the time that it's there. Just out of the idea that there really isn't that much mass in the ground to begin with.
So will you guys have somebody be on site those first couple of months with regularity?
Yes, we'll have someone out there doing the sampling that the Air Board or the Air District will ask us to be doing. I believe that we're looking at 1 to 2 weeks of being there every single day, but we'll also have these other checks that are going on, throughout that first month to make sure that everything's going well. That doesn't mean that the second month, we don't see it at all. It just means the frequency might be once a week. But all of this is also on, some sort of system, telemetry system, so that we can know what's going on. We're getting information constantly from the system. And that was all part of what had to be done up front on the design, but also what we would need to get the permit. Okay, that the letter that you got, you know, for the community communication regarding, you know, whether or not you had questions about the permit. I just want to say that up front. If we were not doing everything that the Air Quality Management District is asking us to do on the design, that letter would never have gone out. You know, and that was part of the reason why it took several months, because they wanted to do their due diligence, do their calculations, look at what was going to be happening, where it was going to be located, how many feet away from windows, things of that nature. And they had to be satisfied before they sent out the letter.
And then Ken, I just want you to add one thing. Can you just talk about the difference between this system, which is remediation, and then the SVEs, which is mitigation? Just
The SSD, that's mitigation.
that the soil vapor extraction is actually long-term cleanup. I just want
So the SVE, we're actually trying to take out that chemical, that mass of chemical that's there in the subsurface. The SSD, the subslab depressurization, is merely trying to break the pathway, trying to make a situation where there isn't a pressure underneath the house in order for the chemical to come up into the house through cracks and the other parts of what Jessica had shown in those diagrams. So the SSD is really meant to be mitigation. It's not meant forever. And the SVE is meant for the more forever cleanup of what's going on.
Thanks. Okay, so it removes the chemicals, so that's how we'll end up actually finishing up this project eventually and not being here anymore. So just wanted to make that clear for folks. Okay, who else has questions? Oh, we have more questions and new ones. Okay, so this gentleman in front, and then I think back there after that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. So from the point of view of a real estate broker and disclosures that are needed to give to a prospective buyer, have you come up with some language or a specific website that we can direct a buyer to so that we fully disclose whatever the current situation is?
So in the very, very beginning, Ford did come up with just, it's like a one sentence letter that says, you know, here's the information I've received about this environmental investigation. When it comes to websites to point them to, first of all, of course, the GeoTracker, that is the state's database. That has all of the reports and data and everything for this project. You can also, as far as the vapor intrusion investigation, I will say the website that Ford has developed has that information specifically for that. It is a little easier to navigate and find stuff. But then we also have said anyone who has any questions, they can reach out to either myself, to Mike, they can call that 800 number with any of it.
But as far as a specific written disclosure, is there anything developed?
No, just that one sentence letter. There's that PDF. But maybe what we can do is also have you guys Ford update that to include those two websites on there with that information.
Yeah, and the letter also refers to what you would get as a sample results letter if people participate in the indoor air program and they've received results which basically tell you whether or not there's a vapor intrusion risk within your home. They've offered that as an opportunity as a disclosure of the letter you received. And I've worked with many prospective buyers and sellers that have either used that letter or seen that letter from property owners.
While you're walking to the back, I'm going to ask a question that we got online, if that's okay. Is that okay if no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask on number 19 that's on and operational, if it makes noise, if we know, or...
Yeah, so it does have a little bit of noise. As you can imagine, you have to move air. We do have a decibel requirement that we're supposed to meet, and our tests during the day have met that requirement. The gate around it will also help with that, but it does have a hum to it, but we're supposed to be below a certain decibel level, which
Okay.
we've achieved.
Is
Thank
that
you.
continuous? Is that a continuous hum, or it just goes on and off? Like
Continuous. The system runs 24 hours a day.
And I'm sorry, you have a question, but I have the same question for the other. So I'm new to this, right? But
Sure.
I was studying the SSD, I think I got that. The SV, that's the underground thing that goes to that unit, and does that make noise as well?
Yes, it does.
But it's also the soil vapor extraction, the cleanup technology, that's gonna be housed within a building to help with the noise reduction. And it has also the same noise requirements as the subslab depressurization systems to operate 24/7. It can exceed, I believe the city requirement is 50 decibels
Correct.
from 3 feet away. And so,
I mean, I understand.
it is gonna meet that, yeah,
Yeah.
and,
Right, it can be on the.
yeah.
The SVE system, the building, we hire acoustical engineers to help develop to contain that noise within there. I would be surprised if you were in, because it's on the outside of Bay Ridge, and for all intents and purposes, almost within One Ford Road, it's on there, you know, it's on Bay Ridge Park's property, but it's on Country Club Drive. I'd be surprised if you would hear it within the community.
Thank you.
I had just one other question. I was curious if the reason that the SSDs are going in was because of the delay with the building.
Yes.
Exactly correct.
Yep. It was always as a contingency because of how the soil vapor extraction system is designed. It's gonna be screened deeper, and so there was always that potential that maybe it's not gonna quite target that shallow right below the foundation. So there was that contingency, but that contingency also included excessive delays, and we finally kind of hit that point, and so we as the regulatory agency said, all right, enough, start installing the subslab depressurization systems, so that way we can get have both working simultaneously.
Okay, and then I think Perry has a question. I think Perry's also been at every meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, to the camera. Mike, you and I met at your office, was it 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
It's been a while, yes.
It's been quite a while. And we've had a lot of meetings, a lot of these general meetings, 2 or 3 of these a year. Jessica, I compliment you. Your presentations are always wonderful. But I feel as if you're getting information from one side. You're not meeting with us, the homeowners, on a regular basis. I suggest once we break ground, we start having regular meetings with homeowners. And the reason I'm saying this is because we're kind of caught in a quandary here. We're in a hurry to get it done, but we don't want to get it done too fast. We want to have the work complete. So we want to get it done in a year, but it may take a lot longer before the work is complete. But what, in my experience with, and I'm going to say wood, and I may be wrong, wood sometimes gets in and they do their work, and then they get busy with other things. And then they go off. And then we call up, I'll call Mike or I'll call the other Daniela and say, hey, don't forget about us. And one phone call with Mike, he said, oh yeah, well, I'll get it to you right away. So suddenly, because I called Mike, I initiated an MOU showing up in our offices. So what I would suggest is that, I don't know who it is, whether it's Mike or Jessica or someone, come and meet with us at Belcourt Terrace on a monthly basis and do a status report and tell us what we can do to UTS this thing along. If we meet 2 or 3 times a year here, I don't think we're going to make that happen. I think once we break ground, once we start this thing, it may be a 3-minute meeting, or it may be a 50-minute meeting, I don't know. But I think that we need better communication than what we've had. As an example, 5 years ago, Mike and I met. Never heard about there was a need for an electrical system to be installed. That showed up a year ago. A year ago, I got noticed that Edison didn't want to put the power source anywhere else. So they're going to put it in the middle of Belcourt Drive. Shock of all shocks. So I wish we had talked about that 5 years ago when I was in your office. We didn't talk about it 5 years ago. We talked about it a year ago, and we're scratching our heads saying, why can't the power source be on Bison? So I had to come in here. Well, I called Edison. We talked to Edison, and Edison said, we're backlogged. We can't do anything for you. Pound sand. I then came in and met with the city, met with a council person. I met with the planner, city planner, and they said, look, the homeowners need to get on the wagon. You need to cooperate. You need to make it happen fast because people will continue to be sick. And the planner was very successful at convincing me that we need to work together and move this thing along quickly. And I'm just saying, please meet with us on a regular basis. Give us a status report, and let's move on.
Well,
Mike, I think you can commit to that, right? You'll be here.
And I'll add, real quick, when it comes to the community outreach, this is why the Water Board's been hosting. We've hosted, this is our 11th meeting. We've had all of those individual community-specific meetings. I know as we're getting closer to implementation of these soil vapor extraction systems, having those community outreach meetings, we've had a couple with Bay Ridge Park. Ford is hosting those meetings because they're the ones who are implementing and doing the actual construction work. They're the ones that have to pull the permits and stuff. But I absolutely hear you, and we can definitely figure out what works for everyone. But we're making sure these are still going forward, and it's not you having to call Mike to say where's things at. You know.
As an example, Mike was kind enough to come to the Belcourt Master Meeting last month, and it was great communication. The people on the board said, thank you for being there, Mike. They really appreciated his time. So I would suggest once we break ground, Mike or someone local, come to that board meeting, the Belcourt Terrace meeting, go to the Bay Ridge meeting, and just give us a quick update. If we're interested enough to live there and to get our communication, coming to our board meetings is a good suggestion.
Yeah, definitely send me the invite. Let me know when they're happening. And if you want me added as an agenda item and what information, we can definitely coordinate that.
So if I can piggyback on the communication effort that will be enhanced moving forward as we get closer to the SVE construction, you may have heard me mention that we have a weekly email that goes out. And I'm not saying that they're not going to be in person. We're going to have an in-person presence as well. But there will be a weekly email that goes out to the Belcourt Terrace community explaining everything that goes forward. There will also be the notices of work, but obviously that doesn't replace an in-person presence. One of the things, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's where I was gone for about a year, but I believe the last time we were at the poolside within Belcourt Terrace was February of 2023, I think. We are going to have another meeting poolside before the SVE construction starts up. We had something similar within Bay Ridge Park. That was a combined meeting where we were talking about SSD and SVE. This one will be specific to SVE. So we will get in front of the community for a meeting before shovels go on the ground. I just have to wait for that MOU to be finalized, the access agreement. Once that's finalized and signed, Perry, we're gonna have major outreach with you guys.
And then I'll add, for Bay Ridge Park and Belcourt Terrace, where they're gonna have the active remediation, the construction that's involved with it, we are working, all of us together, to make sure that communication meets the needs of the community. And I have heard, I think it was just last week, of where the communication is falling short. And as a result, I'm making sure if I'm hearing it, I'm relaying it to Ford, to WSP, to Craig Communications on how do we improve this? Because before construction starts, we need to make sure that communication is up to par for these communities. And if it's not, reach out to us. Let us know, because just like this entire investigation has been done in a phased approach and we have course corrected along the way, we're going to be doing that with our communication, with the system installs and all of that for what is working for everyone.
And if I can also just add, related to Belcourt Master, as far as the communication outreach there, I think that's going to be a little bit more of an upfront effort, because our impact there, while substantial during the trenching and the installation of the transformer, once that is installed, we disappear for all intents and purposes, right? Because there's not an active treatment system there. but doesn't mean that we won't have communication as far as updates pertaining to that transformer, which isn't really a system, it's just gonna be a power drop. But we'll continue to visit that as far as communication within Belcourt Master.
Except that two-car garage is gonna be sitting on Belcourt Drive. We want it out of there as soon as it makes sense to remove it. So I wanna make sure that you folks are not diverted to other things, and keeping in communication with Belcourt Master, who's in charge of Belcourt Drive, will also be important.
It is in the best interest of my client to remove these systems as fast as they can, and we will be on it, yes.
Okay. Other questions? I have one that we got from online that I'm going to read. And what is the situation at the Sea Island Community Association across the road, which is part of this study?
I can take that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so currently right now within the Sea Island community and the surrounding HOAs and common, let's say, right-of-ways within the city of Newport Beach, we're conducting a data gap investigation where we've been collecting groundwater samples. We have a groundwater plume that has shown higher concentrations of these chemicals of concern. For those of you familiar with Belcourt Hill, we've seen concentrations at a deeper depth of water. The depth of groundwater there is approximately 50 feet. As you come down towards Big Canyon Creek and the golf course area, you obviously come down a slope. The depth of groundwater there is probably around 15 to 20 feet. And then as you get onto the golf course, it's about 10 feet. We are trying to delineate the contamination plume within groundwater in that particular area. So that is the work that's being conducted right now. We just finished what we consider phase 1, which was the collection of groundwater, discrete samples. And then we've also installed a number of monitoring wells in different locations. There is a phase 2 approach that will be coming out based on the data that we just collected, where we will make informed decisions on where we might need to step out, and that could impact Sea Island. It could impact Bay Ridge, Belcourt Hill, and lower parts of One Ford Road.
And I'm gonna add that when we're talking about groundwater impacts and stuff, this is shallow groundwater. It's not your drinking water. Drinking water is provided by the city. It is tested regularly. It meets all of your state and federal requirements. So that's not the same groundwater that we're talking about. It is shallow, directly below that. And one of the reasons that it's important to know this is because that dissolved contamination in groundwater is what is one of the sources of that groundwater plume, or of the soil vapor plume. And so we need to make sure we have a full understanding of that, so that we can address all of that contamination to ultimately get everything cleaned up so the site can get to case closure.
One quick question about
Hold on, I'm just going to let Sarah get the microphone for you. Sorry, I know it's awkward.
Thank you. Were people feeling sick, and that is why all of this transpired, or how did we finally decide, let's test all of this?
So that is where there was that conceptual site model, that big report in 2017 that the Water Board had requested an updated conceptual site model. This is really common after that US EPA memo in 2014 and those updated environmental screening levels in 2016. And we do this periodically with all of our sites anyways, but we take a reevaluation, a look at it again, and see if really the standards have changed over time, and does the data from that was, determined no data gaps or no health risks, has our knowledge changed, and now we need to take that second look. And it's that report, the concentrations haven't increased. The concentrations that were collected in 2006 and that 2008 assessment, they're relatively the same. They were all a little bit lower, but not significantly lower, but they were reduced. They hadn't increased, which says there's not this active source feeding it. This is how we also have some of that confidence that the soil vapor extraction system is going to sufficiently clean it up in a relatively short time period. Another thing is we have all of that monitoring that is going up 2 times a year, and we're able to look at the concentrations over time and see what they're doing. And knowing that in a lot of areas, the concentrations are either staying stable or decreasing slightly, and that lets us know that there isn't some kind of unexpected soil source or something that got missed back in the cleanup in the 90s. And that's why we also have so many probes placed, and they were all very strategically placed, and why Ford doesn't just put dots on a map and go out without our approval. As the regulatory oversight, they submit those work plans to us. We look at their justifications for where they're placed. I've got the old 1995 assessment that shows all of those former areas of interest. I look at the historical topo maps and make sure that when they're placing probes, that they are being strategically placed properly, that we can identify if and where that residual soil gas contamination is, so that we're not missing it.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Other questions? Oh, right in front, Sarah. Front and left, nice white jacket. Hold on one moment. There you go. Sorry.
So with Sea Island, with the work that you just completed, when will you have those results?
We have the analytical results. We need to go through a data validation process, which is what we do internally to verify that the laboratory has run all the procedures correctly. We then will submit a summary report to Jessica. Once that report is submitted to Jessica, that is a public document. I would anticipate 60 days at the end of the investigation is when we're supposed to get that to you?
So we put a deadline of submitting the report documenting the field activities and all the results 60 days from when they finished the field work. So that gives them time to do that data validation, draw up the figures, prepare the tables, write the report.
And that'll go up on the website, but I know you and I will be talking. I'll let you know when that hits the streets. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions or comments? One last one in the back. Okay.
If my air was tested and then Wood had subsequently checked with me to have me tested again, and then they came back and said it wasn't necessary, should I reach out again, or am I not needing to be tested if I'm not being contacted?
I think, let's say, if you don't mind, can we handle that? I can look at your property and
Sure.
I can get you a specific answer, because each home, based on their results, falls into a particular category, and without having that database in front of me, it's hard for me to make an informed decision.
Yep, okay, you bet.
An answer.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, and as a reminder, we'll be here after, and we have maps over here, so property-specific questions we're happy to address. Other questions or comments? Okay, well, I'd like to say thank you for coming. I would like to apologize on the team's behalf for some of the miscommunications, and we really will work very hard to do better. And thank you for giving us that opportunity to do that. And have a nice evening.
Hi.